All right, let's dive into the early modern period. This incredible, chaotic time between the 14th and 17th centuries. And, this wasn't just some slow, gradual change. We're talking about a series of massive transformations that literally built the world we live in today. We usually call this time the Renaissance, right? It means rebirth. But that word itself, which was coined by the people living through it, kind of makes it sound like they were just dusting off some old books from Greece and Rome. But what if it was way more than that? What if it was a full-blown revolution in how people saw everything, themselves, their world, and their place in the universe? I mean, just look at this. This slide captures what might be the single biggest shift in Western history. The medieval way of thinking was all about the other world. Your life on Earth was just a dress rehearsal for the afterlife. But then, boom, the focus pivots to this world. Suddenly, life here and now, what humans could achieve, what you as an individual could do, that all started to matter. This wasn't a minor tweak, it was a total break from 1,000 years of tradition. So, what was the engine that drove this massive change? Well, it all kicked off with an intellectual revolution called humanism. This was the philosophical spark that really lit the fire of the modern age. Now, here's the key thing to get about humanism. It wasn't necessarily anti-God or anti-religion. It was just profoundly pro-human. The big idea was that we could understand ourselves on our own terms, not just as creations of God. It was a celebration of human potential and our ability to ask tough questions about the world without needing a divine answer for every little thing. And to do this, they developed a whole new intellectual toolkit. They moved away from the super rigid, faith-based logic of the Middle Ages and dove back into the classical texts of thinkers like Plato and Cicero. They put this huge new emphasis on things like eloquence, history, and moral philosophy, basically the arts of being a persuasive and well-rounded human being. This whole new way of thinking was championed by guys like Petrarch, who's often called the father of humanism, and Erasmus. Now, Erasmus was a total intellectual rock star of his day. He used his incredible wit, especially in his book The Praise of Folly, to make fun of rigid dogma and call out the corruption in the church. He was pushing for a smarter, simpler kind of. Okay, so you've got this humanist spark, this new confidence in human reason. Let's look at how it ignited two absolutely massive revolutions that completely turned the universe inside out and totally redefined our relationship with God. For more than 1,000 years, this was it. This was the universe. Everybody believed that the Earth was the unmoving center of everything, based on the work of the ancient astronomer Ptolemy. The sun, the planets, all the stars, they all circled around us. And this wasn't just science, it was theology. It put humanity right at the physical and spiritual center of God's creation. And then came Copernicus. His idea that the Earth actually revolves around the sun, which was later proven by Galileo, didn't just rearrange the furniture of the solar system. It shattered the entire old worldview. It kicked humanity out of its privileged spot at the center of everything and paved the way for modern science, a science based on observation, not just on faith. You saw a really similar top-down structure in religion, too. In the medieval church, you couldn't just talk to God directly. Nope. It was a strict chain of command. You had to go through your local priest, who answered to the church hierarchy, all the way up to the Pope. The church held all the keys to salvation. But Martin Luther and the Protestant Reformation completely blew that structure apart. His core idea was that salvation comes through faith, and faith alone. You didn't need the church to act as a middleman. This created a direct, personal, one-on-one relationship between an individual and God. It was revolutionary. So, as all these old certainties about the cosmos and about religion started to crumble, new things rose up to take their place. New political structures appeared, and new ways of expressing what it meant to be human began to flourish. People started thinking of themselves not just as Christians, but as, say, English or French. The old feudal system, with its messy web of local lords and loyalties, started to fall apart. And in its place, you got these powerful, centralized monarchies in countries like England, France, and Spain. This created a whole new sense of national identity and gave birth to the modern idea of the state, a political entity independent of the church. And this new political world needed a new rulebook, a much more realistic one. And that is exactly what Niccolo Machiavelli delivered with his incredibly famous or infamous book, The Prince. Machiavelli's idea was absolutely radical for its time.
He basically said that politics plays by its own rules, completely separate from traditional morality or religion. The main job of a ruler, he argued, isn't to be a good person, it's to keep the state secure and powerful, and you should use any means necessary to do it. It was a cold, hard look at how power actually works. But at the exact same time, you had other thinkers using literature not to describe the world as it is, but to imagine how much better it could be. A perfect example is the English humanist Sir Thomas More and his incredible book, Utopia. More invented this fictional island called Utopia, a name that literally means no place, as a way to hold a mirror up to all the problems he saw in Europe. By describing this perfect society, he was able to cleverly criticize things like religious persecution, the huge gap between the rich and the poor, and the constant obsession with war. And of course, no one, and I mean no one, captured the pure human drama of this wild, changing world better than William Shakespeare. As authors started writing in their own everyday languages, the vernacular, instead of Latin, Shakespeare emerged as the master, exploring the inner lives of his characters like no one ever had before. I mean, Shakespeare's plays are a whole universe. They're this deep dive into human psychology, but they also dramatize the central conflict of the age, that clash between the old world of feudal honor and this new modern world driven by money and personal ambition. He basically captured the soul of the new individual. This era also saw writers begin to fight, and fight passionately, for the kinds of intellectual freedoms that we now see as the bedrock of democracy. And you can't talk about that without talking about the English poet John Milton, who was also a polemicist, which is a fancy word for someone who writes fierce public arguments. Milton's essay, Areopagitica, is still one of the most powerful defenses of free speech ever written. He argued against censorship with his powerful belief that the best way to find truth is to let all ideas clash in a free and open debate. It was a cornerstone idea of civic humanism, the belief in an active, engaged citizenry. And finally, with this absolute explosion of new ideas, new politics, and new literature, something else was born, the act of criticism itself. For pretty much the first time, people started to step back and ask, systematically, what is literature actually for? All of a sudden, these huge questions were on the table. Should a writer try to copy the real world? Or should they copy the great authors of the past? Is the point of a poem to teach you a moral lesson, or just to be beautiful? Should we keep writing in Latin, or use the language people actually speak? Can we just invent new types of stories? These debates laid the groundwork for all of modern literary theory. So when you look back, from a God-centered universe to a human-centered one, from feudal loyalties to national identity, from blind faith to critical thinking, the people of the early modern period completely remade their world. And it just goes to show you that even the most fundamental ideas can be challenged and overturned, which kind of leaves us with one last question to think about. What rock-solid truths of our own time might be next on the chopping block?